Hello and welcome to Base Camp, a climbing magazine podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Riley. Thank you for tuning in. Have one last gear episode for you. I was in Las Vegas and ended up stopping by Desert Rock Sports to talk with co-owner Travis Graves. And as the summer temps are approaching and the climbing season at Red Rocks is coming to a close, wanted to speak to Travis about some of the hot sellers in the shop as well as some of the gear trends that he's been seeing this season. And it's also been a wet season, so we ended up talking about some of the conservation issues and safety issues that are associated with climbing on wet rock and how we can educate ourselves and others about, when it is appropriate to climb after it rains. Now, if you've ever met Travis, he's full of a lot of great information, so make sure you stay tuned through the end of the show. And just let's get to it. But first, a word from our sponsor. All right, you're locked in. Kicking is locked. Your knot looks good. Double back. You got your pants. You got your slings. You got some nuts. Ready to rock and roll.
Sweet, man. Climbing.
Climb on. This episode is presented by Black Diamond Equipment. The world's best-selling, most trusted cam just got better. Now 10% lighter, these bad boys feature a more modern design that gives climbers everything they love about the old Camelots, with new touch points like a wider trigger for easier handling and an innovative trigger keeper for compact racking with sizes number 4, number 5, and number 6. For more information about the redesigned Camelot C4s, visit blackdiamondequipment.com. I'm with you. Falling. Oh man, nice fall.
That was thin up there.
Yeah, you slipped out of it, huh?
That was getting tough.
Black Diamond. Live, climb, repeat. Here with Travis Graves, the owner, or co-owner, I should say, right?
Co-owner, yeah.
Over at Desert Rock Sports and Red Rock Climbing Guides and Red Rock Climbing Center.
You got it all.
Perfect. And I'd like to start off with the rain, since it's just starting to rain here in Vegas right now. I've been at the shop when it's rained or the day after, and there's always a flood of climbers coming into the shop saying, like, what do I do? Can you maybe give me a little bit of information about some of the issues that we have here at Red Rocks with rain and some alternatives to climbing at Red Rocks when it is wet?
Yeah, it's become probably a more noticeable, prominent issue over the last several years. I mean, more people are coming to Red Rock every year, getting busier like most places. And, especially this year, like most places actually across the country, it's been a above average precip year, quite a lot out here. So we had a lot of this winter and even recently here, talking with you, Kevin, that it's raining once again in Red Rock. And,
Yeah.
It's become a pretty contentious hot subject in, I guess in some areas out there in social media and so forth. And, yeah, so Red Rock being a sandstone climbing area and a desert sandstone climbing area, very dissimilar, unlike southeastern sandstone. It's a pretty porous, soft rock type. And so it tends to absorb moisture very easily. And when it does so, it gets considerably more fragile or brittle or weak, or however you want to look at it. So,
and about how long does it take to dry out typically? I know it depends on how much rain it.
Yeah, definitely. And I know there is some general statements to try to help people out there. It's kind of a more generic rule out there. I think you'll find is 24 to 48 hours. I think even the Access Fund has kind of got back behind that with some of the literature and information that they have out there too. But it's really actually not quite that simple. Just because, when you have rain, I mean, it can rain for a few minutes, it can rain for several hours, it can rain for several days. And then you also have conditions, here in Red Rock. I mean, you have a long climbing season here, fall through spring, where the temperatures are really good for climbing, whether that be in the sun or the shade. But, the sun versus the shade is a big issue. If you get a decent amount of precip, it's going to take a lot longer for shady aspect areas to dry out than the sun. So, sometimes the 24 to 48 hour rule doesn't really basically cover like the whole sort of situation with drying out. We had a lot of precipitation this winter, and combined with not only short days, so less sunlight, less exposure to sun, you have colder temperatures too working against you. So, I think there were times, stretches this winter where some shady climbs in Red Rock, based on the frequency and the amount of rain we're getting, I mean, it was setting up to be like a week or more for some stuff to dry out.
Are there signals you can look for?
There are somewhat. I mean, it's, kind of another general one is like if you go to an area and you notice that the rock is discolored or the ground below the base of a climb is discolored, it's probably one of the easier indicators that, things are obviously still wet and probably not a good idea to climb. But it is tricky because going back to the rock being porous, I've been involved with the Southern Nevada Climbers Coalition for many years, and I had a friend of mine who was helping out a lot with some of the rebolting going on in Red Rock over the years, and he told me a story. It was probably roughly about a week after a lot of precip in the Red Rock, and he thought he had given obviously the rock plenty of time to dry because it was about a week after the last rain, and he was actually doing some rebolting, and he was drilling a new bolt hole, and he said he probably figured it was maybe somewhere between a centimeter and an inch into the rock. He was drilling into basically wet sand.
Wow.
So, I mean, obviously it's not something that you can necessarily feel, it's not something you can necessarily see. So yeah, I mean, the 24 to 48 hour guideline helps, but, it's a good thing, that when we do have bad weather, that there are obviously sometimes droves of people that come into the shop, kind of wondering what to do, when the sandstone here is wet, how long they should wait, what are the alternatives. We can try to guide them in, hey, you probably need to stay off like shady aspect sort of routes, for longer than 48 hours at times. And, it's probably more in depth of what they get when they talk to us at the shop than maybe what they'll find on Mountain Project or some of the other areas out there. But those guidelines that are out there on Mountain Project and so forth are great, that at least it's a starting point. And it is mentioned in the guide, some of the local guidebooks and so forth too. And it is actually, when you pull up the Red Rock homepage, even on Mountain Project, there is a banner there kind of warning people about wet rock conditions. But it's challenging because you have people, that don't understand what the composition of sandstone is. Maybe they do come from a granite background, or again, climbing in the southeast on the sandstone there, where the rock, even, in wet conditions, can be quite solid.
Yeah.
And the other reality is, Red Rock is a world famous destination. So people come from all around the world to climb here. And very often we'll have precip here in the Red Rock, and the next day it's sunny, and really that drying out is just beginning. And then you have people that get off a plane or roll into town, and it's sunny, and they're psyched and they're ready to go climbing, and they don't know what the prior history is in terms of precip, so they might not be aware. So it's a contentious issue, because with locals and different people, they see people out there climbing right after rains and stuff like that, and it's a big sort of ethical
enforcement's
issue.
Difficult too.
Yeah, and it's not
the park's not really getting involved. You can go through the gate while it's raining, and they're not going to say anything.
Yeah, and it's not something you can enforce, obviously, in terms of something being illegal. And basically to look at it is like, granted, there are people that are out there they're probably aware of sort of the situation with the Wet Rock, but they're on a trip and they have limited climbing days and time, and they're choosing to disregard that, which is unfortunate, and then again, there's a segment for sure of people that weren't aware of what maybe just happened in the recent history with the precipitation, or they just don't understand, that the rock can be brittle. So it's not just everybody is, public enemy number one.
Oh, totally.
Even though sometimes I feel like it gets framed that way, by locals and social media and stuff like that. And it just goes back to, the sort of education that's needed for an area like Red Rock from, obviously us at the front line at like the store or the climbing gym or the guide service, or on Mountain Project or the Southern Nevada Climbers Coalition, Access Fund. I mean, Climbing Magazine, even, just getting the word out about, areas that have more sensitive, issues. So it's, it's obviously it's a complex sort of situation. There is no really simple answer. I don't think, in terms of going back to a 24, 48 hour thing. And obviously you can't prosecute for somebody to climbing on, for climbing on wet rock. But the one thing I will, sort of say is that I find how this issue has sort of evolved is that, there are very prominent problems and routes and so forth in Red Rock. And, and over the years, Red Rock has, become sort of more popular and more noticeable as, newer routes have been developed and more prominent climbers climb here and share their experiences and so forth. And so people, when they look at wet rock and they frame it in sort of an ethical sort of, maybe argument or situation, is that they look at it like, well, I don't want to alter a route. I don't want to, I don't want to tear a key hold off of a route and, change its grade dramatically, make it so maybe it's not possible to climb anymore. And that is definitely, part of the discussion to have, part of the story. But what I come across and what seems to really be forgotten here is the safety aspect.
Yeah.
So much of the discussion with wet rock is like altering climbs and not actually talking about just the safety of actually being out in Red Rock on lead, potentially breaking a hold, taking a bad lead fall, breaking off, dislodging a large chunk of rock, taking out your belayer or other climbers below you. There's been, just like a lot of areas, a lot of bad accidents and lead fall accidents and rock fall accidents. And so you're really heightening that risk too. So it's, that's really the other side of the story. And it's the other side of the story I feel like that kind of gets lost in the fold in this, sort of discussion that's been going on recently, which is more about like, altering these routes that everybody knows about and that sort of thing, rather than really stepping back and looking at it as also very much, if not more importantly, a safety issue too.
And what are some of the alternative crags around here that might be granite or limestone that you can climb at after it rains?
Yeah, we're actually pretty lucky here in Vegas. I mean, when we get a lot of people stopping into the store or, quite often calling too. And it's great that, again, that people are at least making the effort to ask us as locals to kind of get the best sort of alternative beta. Vegas is surrounded by, an immense amount of limestone. So there are, depending on the time of year, there usually are many, many crags that you can go climbing at. And granted, it's limestone and it's going to be sport climbing based for that. So, if you're getting rained out of Red Rock or even snowed out of Red Rock at times, it may not be like you're going to easily transition to, some other area to go climb multi-pitch trad. But there's a lot of limestone. There's a lot of climbers who now live in Las Vegas that are passionate sport climbers that actually climb on limestone year round that actually don't climb in Red Rock. Well, just because of the amount of limestone that's around here. So I think that's pretty surprising. It's becoming more known throughout kind of the climbing community and world, but it's actually kind of interesting to explain that to people and have them go check out these areas. And they weren't coming here either knowing that there were limestone options, or maybe they'd kind of heard about it. They weren't planning on it. And then they got kind of pushed in that direction, and are pleasantly surprised. So, if it's not actually precipitating to where, you're forced into taking a rest day or climbing in a gym or obviously, doing all the other things you can do in Vegas, and you want to actually get out and get some pitches in. Yeah, there are a lot of really good options. And there's even a bit of granite locally that you can boulder on, and even a bit of trad to do that's, pretty much in the immediate vicinity. But, the other thing about Vegas too is it's not very long of a drive to go to some place like Joshua Tree if you need to, spend a day or two somewhere else while the sandstone here dries out. We're kind of at the epicenter of a lot of surrounding climbing areas, whether it be limestone or granite. So, whether you want to just stay in town and sample some of the local stuff, or do like a long day trip, or even looking at doing an overnight somewhere and coming back. I always tell people, I'm like, there's a lot of options. Like if it's obviously not precipitating, there's no reason to get shut down by climbing just because it might not be safe or wise to climb in Red Rock while, the sandstone in Red Rock dries out. There's still, obviously a lot of other climbing.
Great. And I want to talk gear, because we just published our gear guide, and the season here is kind of wrapping up, at least the winter season over here at Red Rocks. Specifically, I'd love to talk about maybe some of the best-selling gear at the store this season, or some trends that maybe you saw as far as climbing gear goes.
Yeah, I think, we're in an area where there's, which is, I guess I should say, makes Red Rock incredibly unique, probably unique not only for America, North America, worldwide, is that you actually have a lot of bouldering here. You have a lot of sport climbing, and you have a lot of trad, and especially multi-pitch trad.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of climbing destinations you go to, I always feel like have one or two out of the three, but never, kind of all the above, I guess. So it's obviously, we, do offer and sell a wide spectrum of gear when it comes to styles of shoes and harnesses and your protection and so forth to kind of, really accommodate all those different aspects of climbing. But, I think there's some pretty interesting new gear out there, definitely some trends, like you said. And, just thinking about it, I kind of wanted to start off, I guess, with something that I personally think is kind of a little bit sort of funny or interesting. And that's what I've seen over the years happen with crack climbing gloves and belay glasses.
Yeah.
So both of those products have actually been around for a number of years now. I think belay glasses came into the US a number of years ago from a guy importing them from Germany, actually, before they, became more, I guess, widespread in terms of different companies manufacturing them and offering them. But, and with the crack gloves too, basically both of those items for years when, we started carrying them and obviously continue to do so, is that people kind of thought they were a little gimmicky and kind of ridiculous. And
you maybe could put me in that.
Yeah. And it's like, I was, kind of curious or had, my questions or apprehension at first. And I think it's like getting over this sort of like, older mindset. Even if you're a new climber, you're like, well, tape gloves and, belay glasses are just kind of these, like, what are they, like something you can lay on your couch and watch TV or something like that. But, yeah, so I feel like it was just like not too long ago in the recent past that, it was like a switch flipped. And now, I feel like they've kind of become this accepted norm where more and more people are seeking them out and realizing that, they obviously have a lot of utility. And so it's like one of those things, I guess, that's, becoming more widely accepted and not really snickered at anymore or whatever. So, which is a good thing. So that's, I always think that's kind of cool how, something like that has kind of changed. And, those are very, very popular items and, and out here too. And, so anyways, that's kind of an interesting sort of, the script is flipped on those two items over the years from what I've seen. And then, we were talking about this, just the other day, actually, to bring up another piece of gear, is, and can reference like the Sterling hollow block, for example. And Sterling makes basically like an auto block sling out of tech fiber to back up your rappel. And it's an alternative to just buying your own 5 or 6 millimeter cord and tying up your own prusik or auto block for backing up your rappel. And I feel it's been something that or I guess I've seen, or maybe a trend that's changed as more and more people have become educated with safer practices in climbing, is that more often even newer climbers and older climbers alike are starting to just realize that, it's a good idea to back up your rappel in situations. Obviously, whether that be single pitch sport climbing or trad, we obviously have a lot of multi-pitch climbing out here in Red Rock where you're doing long rappels and questioning whether or not you're going to reach the anchor or find the anchor. So, of course there's other things like tying knots in the end of your ropes, but yeah, those, a lot of people seek out the Sterling hollow block in particular, or quite often we're selling, sections of cord for people to tie their own. So, I think that's obviously a super positive trend because, we talked about how a lot of accidents in climbing happen on rappel.
Yeah,
actually.
absolutely.
So, and I always like to frame this with some of customers and definitely with my friends, is that, in climbing, if you're obviously taking the time to be open and receptive to your mentors or your teachers or guides, or, if you're reading material, you're really thinking about obviously safe practices and being redundant, especially, in climbing, obviously by backing up your rappel, but, when we go to build anchors, whether it be top rope anchors or equalized gear anchors on trad routes or multi-pitch, like we're thinking about, redundancy and how can we make our systems as safe as possible and that sort of thing. And we think about these things very much in the realm of going upward.
Yeah.
Like it's all about like going up and, obviously topping out and completing your climb and hopefully being successful and sending and everything like that and being safe while doing it. And it's funny how you can get to the top of your multi-pitch climb or you can get to the top of your single pitch route and maybe you got to build an anchor and somebody else is going to top rope it, or you got to bring your partner or followers up and you're thinking about all these things, but then, you get to the time where it's time to descend. And really the whole idea of like redundancy and everything is just out the window.
Yeah.
So it's like now you're on rappel and, you're just relying on the fact that you need to maintain control of the rope by squeezing your hand tight around the rope and keeping it in a braking position coming out of your rappel device. And it's really, there's no backup. Yeah. So if you're using most tube style devices or that sort of thing, if you were to lose your control of the rope for whatever reason, I mean, you could get hit with some rock, you could get lightheaded and pass out, you could rappel over a roof or slip and, smack your hand against the rock or something like that cause you to lose control. There's numerous sort of things that could happen to cause you to lose control.
And once you lose control,
you're not getting it back.
You're not getting it back. So, you're going to burn yourself pretty bad.
Yeah. So it's, it's just kind of interesting how we're so worried about redundancy in one arena of climbing and then we're so not concerned about it. So it seems very...
It just feels like you're done through the dangerous part. But in reality, like you said, most accidents happen on the way down during the descent. Cleaning anchors, you hear all the time, people being lowered off the end of the ropes. You know, that's when most of the accidents happen, not, leading some real scary pitch.
Yeah, and I think it's like more people being aware of that. So my funny way to poke at this kind of glaring inconsistency or really this imbalance that exists is like, I always like to challenge people. I'm like, well, if you really don't feel the need to be redundant or to back up your rappel, I mean, you might as well just be consistent and really not worried about redundancy when you're building your anchor. So I'm like, I always tell trad climbers, I'm like, just go up and, throw one nut in and, throw a sling on it and bring your partner up and, who cares, right? About being redundant because you're probably not going to be redundant on rappel, So anyways, it's like just more of to try to push people to think about like, well, maybe they should try to think about safety and redundancy, across the whole spectrum of climbing.
So you brought up the Sterling hollow block. What's the benefit of a hollow block over just standard 6mm cord? Yeah,
so it's cut in a pretty convenient length for actually, basically wrapping the rope auto block fashion. And so I mentioned that it was kind of made out of a tech fiber that is actually has a high heat melting resistance. There's already a lot of friction that's generated when you're sliding an auto block down a rope on rappel. So that's actually, not only does that kind of wear and tear happen on your auto block, accessory cord material, but it's also happening to the sheath of your rope too. And the hollow block's kind of interesting in that the first part of the name is hollow. There's actually no core in the hollow block.
Sure.
The tech fiber is actually, not only does it have a high sort of heat resistance, melting resistance, but it's a very strong fiber too. So it actually doesn't have a core. And I always kind of explain it when you handle it. It's kind of like the old Chinese finger cuffs. Like when you kind of like,
it feels a lot like that.
Yeah. Right? So it actually, the way that it's woven like that without a core is that it actually slides along the rope quite nicely, but then actually will bind up quickly if need to be too. So,
interesting.
So in that, a sense, it's pretty ergonomic, I guess I'd say, in that way too. In addition to providing, obviously the higher sort of resistance to heat, friction, that sort of thing. But obviously that's something I've seen that more and more people are at least seem to be more conscientious about, like, having something to back up the rappel. So that's obviously a big positive that I've seen, is more and more people are doing that.
And what about on the hard goods side? Seeing any hot sellers?
Yeah, I mean, I think I am kind of impressed with myself and have kind of changed up some of the gear I used as is the kind of bulletproof line or the use of steel and climbing gear that Edelrid has kind of I guess, gone to with certain carabiners and devices in the past few years. So, as climbers, we're obviously, like most sort of sports, we think about weight, like we want light, light is right, light is better, that sort of thing. And obviously steel anything in climbing is like, like it's heavy, it's clunky,
industrial.
It's like, are you going to do that as training weight or something like that? Bringing around a bunch of steel carabiners with you. But, obviously with climbing gyms everywhere, and then, especially at sport cliffs, a lot of sport cliffs that have like perma draws or fixed draws, like there's a lot of steel components. And, no doubt it's because, one big thing with steel is it's much longer lasting than aluminum when it comes to wear. So you have this durability aspect. There's also a lot less heat buildup with steel too, especially if you're thinking about like a rappel device. Like when you do a long rappel, your aluminum carabiner in your device can get quite hot, to the touch. But yeah, the trade-off has always been just the clunky, heavy aspect to steel. So it's interesting that Edelrid has really found a way to try to give you the best of both worlds and create like sort of hybrid style carabiners, and with their bulletproof carabiners. So they actually have an aluminum carabiner with a steel basket where the rope bearing surface is. So you're trying to realize the benefits of steel with the longer wear and the less heat buildup, and but not be penalized with a bunch of extra weight. So you get something that honestly is better for the environment, because you won't be replacing your carabiners as frequently, whether it be your Belay carabiner or carabiners on your quick draws. So a lot of people, if they just want to, get into it, they might buy a couple of quick draws or a couple of, bent gates to basically build anchor draws out of the steel carabiners, or the bulletproof, the aluminum steel carabiners, so they can actually have, those carabiners in areas where you get excessive amounts of wear, which is the draws at the top of climbs, especially if you top rope afterwards, or a lot of times even the first bolt of a climb. The rope bearing carabiner on the first bolt.
There's a safety story there as well, because as you mentioned, those baskets, they can get quite a bit of wear, and then you have a groove, and that can become sharp and cut a rope a lot easier.
Yeah, and actually, so that's going to be, obviously on the, extreme end for sure, and obviously there's been some documented cases with this now. But the other thing that's kind of interesting, and this goes with Edelrid, to note too, makes kind of the jewel line with the jewels and the megajewels and now the gigajoule that are incorporate steel into the devices too, to kind of complete the steel story. So again, a lot less heat buildup and a lot less grooving with your device. And of course, that's going to be much better for your rope and potentially the longevity of your rope too. And so, we're going back to being here in Red Rock. We're in the desert Southwest, and we have red sand here. It's like when things get dirty, they kind of turn red.
Yeah.
And you go other places. I'm from Vermont originally, and things get dirty, they're muddy brown. However, no matter where you climb, when your ropes get dirty, they always seem to be pretty black, gray and black. So I think it's a big sort of clue right there that your dirtiness is not coming from your rope running across the rock or, sitting in the ground off of a rope tarp or something like that. But majority of why your rope is dirty is all the aluminum and anodization coming off of your carabiners and your belay device. So by the sort of incorporating steel into these systems, again, your rope can last a lot longer, but your rope can actually stay a lot cleaner a lot longer, as well as your hands, especially if you don't use belay gloves. I mean, you get down to the end of a climbing day and your hands are all black. And again, it's coming off of your carabiners. It's not coming off the rock or your ropes picking it up off the ground. And I think a lot of people don't realize, that. And I mean, there's a whole other discussion there too, I guess, for some people, when you think about like the bioaccumulation of heavy metals, if you're sitting around and you climb often outside and your hands are constantly dirty from heavy metals and all this stuff that your body's sort of ingesting and absorbing over time, you can imagine over a long climbing career, what that must maybe be like. Because I know when I'm down on the ground and I get done a route or whatever like that, I'm going to reach over and grab some snacks or whatever like that, and I'm going to be handling food and stuff with my my bare dirty hands and all that, like all the time or whatever, probably not washing my hands till the end of the climbing day. So there's just some other stuff out there that obviously I think the steel story is really interesting, and Edelrid's causing, I guess, to rethink a discussion when it comes to steel and climbing rather than just being more in sort of fixed permanent applications.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of benefits when it comes to, whether or not you want to use one of their belay devices, but at least with some of the carabiners, like I said, to kind of make your rope last longer, keep things sort of less dirty, the safety aspect, and the health aspect maybe, but, and of course they kind of frame it too, like just in terms of an environmental aspect, making something that is not going to be as disposable or, as frequently basically needing to be replaced, which is a good thing. So less worn out carabiners getting, tossed or whatever. So
every season you end up selling me a few new pieces of gear that you talk me into. And just today you sold me on a dynamic cord for anchor building and other miscellaneous things. But up on your wall, there's quite a few slings and dynamic cords that brands are coming out with. Can you tell me a little bit about that trend?
Yeah, and I think it's somewhat of this is a newer trend, I think, and I think it's something that people shopping around for climbing gear, maybe this summer as more areas are coming into season, and even though we're kind of going out of our busy season here in Red Rock and moving forward into, late 2019 and 2020, is companies starting to embrace like more dynamic sort of slings, anchoring, sort of
personal anchors.
Yeah, kind of maybe at least providing an alternative, right? I won't say like moving away from to the use of maybe Spectra and Dyneema, which is so incredibly super static out there, and obviously with items that are super static in certain applications, they can really amplify the forces that are generated on your gear and obviously go back to you as the climber. But so you're starting to see more personal anchor style systems, Petzl makes the Connect adjustable, I guess you can look at it as like almost like an adjustable, daisy or tether or something like that is made with dynamic climbing rope that you can actually use as a primary anchoring positioning device, unlike adjustable daisies from other companies in the past, which aren't full strength and you can only use for positioning. You can't use it by itself due to low sort of braking strengths. But so you get like a robust, sort of dynamic climbing rope that is going to enter a more dynamic element into the system, but also probably going to last more or better or longer when it comes to just abrasion also. So, Petzl and Camp actually recently came out with their sort of dynamic tether, I guess you'd say, I think, which is called the Swing, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. And I know Metolius is going to be coming out with basically a dynamic rope version of their personal anchor system.
Oh, cool.
I think which might be next fall or next spring when that's kind of out normally, for sale. And then Bial has actually started making different lengths in common lengths to 60, 120 centimeter, 24, 48 inch slings out of climbing rope, as well as what you bought today actually was a 7 mil cordelette that's more of a dynamic rope construction than normal accessory cord. So yeah, just, I guess, going back and thinking about adding more dynamic elements into your anchoring sort of situation to try to, minimize these high forces that can be generated. There is a trade-off there too of these things. Dynamic climbing rope is, it's a bulkier item than, some of these skinny Spectra Dyneema slings. But also, better to use in certain scenarios. I think one of the big things out there, I guess this, happened years ago with when Metolius actually introduced the personal anchor system, was to kind of give people a safer alternative to using daisy chains, which were not developed necessarily for anchoring positioning, but were kind of perceived as being convenient for that. So, and they have their safety issues and their strength issues. And so, Metolius, I think, had started that. And obviously that was kind of a cascading effect. And now most companies offer, some sort of product to help you tether, anchor yourself in and have it be somewhat adjustable, which is obviously great. But now it's getting people educated. I think what happens a lot is especially with these skinnier, super static Dyneema Spectra slings, you see people girth hitching them to their belay loop or their tie-in points of their harness and just using it as a light and simple way to anchor themselves at the top of a route to, clean the anchor or anchor themselves in if they're rappelling a multi-pitch route. And really slings like that weren't designed for that sort of use. As convenient as they may seem visually, they're lightweight, they're compact. They weren't designed for that application. It's like the Dyneema Spectra slings in general. They are super static. They have a low melting point. They're skinny, so the friction and abrasion that can happen can compromise them pretty quickly comparative to a normal nylon sling or some of these now dynamic rope slings that you're seeing. So they're great for attaching to a piece of a trad gear or extending a sling out on a bolt where the rope is going to be clipped to one end and the rope is acting as the dynamic component should the climber take a fall, even a slip at the anchor, for example. You have a dynamic element in the system, but now people are kind of using these skinny Spectra Dyneema slings without the rope in the system when they're connecting themselves to an anchor when there is no rope, and can actually generate some pretty high forces, or sitting there and running the rope back and forth across these skinny slings as they're flaking the rope on a multi-pitch route or something like that. So it's again, I think a practice that with a little bit of education can kind of get people hopefully to move away from just again, I guess, think about being safer, being more redundant, some of the things we kind of talked about in general as we started this conversation.
Is there a product out there that any climber coming to Red Rock should have in their kit that you can think of?
By default, that would be the guidebook, actually. I mean, definitely the most popular item that we have at the shop, and it
always seems to sell out whenever you need one.
Yeah, it's the guidebook for Red Rock is very well done. We're lucky to have a very talented author, very knowledgeable author. He self-published the book. It's been very much a labor of love. In Red Rock, I talk to people that, it's almost like, I guess, in this day and age of like, our guidebook's going to be dead soon. Is everything going to be online? Is everything going to be digital? Is everybody just going to be using Mountain Project or some other platform as their guidebook with their smartphones or something like that? And
hasn't happened yet.
It hasn't happened yet. And I mean, the guidebook, I always tell people, it's like the pictures, the big clear pictures are more than half the battle here in Red Rock. I feel like, Mountain Project is so useful and it works well so many areas that maybe aren't as involved and intricate as Red Rock when it comes to not only identifying the crags, the routes at crags, but just getting to the crags. We have a lot of, basically like cross country or, hiking across rocks and areas where you're not on defined trails, and it's complicated. And even with a guidebook, it's still easy to get turned around, that sort of thing. But I think people learn the limitations of just trying to stare down at a smaller picture on their smartphone. But the guidebook is no doubt, the big thing in the shop. But going back, it's just like there is basically a wide array of climbers that come here, because so many people come here for bouldering, so many people come here for sport climbing. So people, obviously come here for the multi-pitch routes and a lot of the long moderate multi-pitch routes, which is what initially made Red Rock sort of famous or put it on the map as a prominent destination. So, we're fortunate that, we try to have a wide array and spectrum of gear to really meet the needs or the desires, I guess I should say, of a lot of different climbers, whether you like, some sort of specific aspect of climbing or like it all, obviously, which you can do everything here.
Well, maybe a poop bag.
Oh yeah, the rest stop bags, actually. I guess it's been for a number of years now. The Southern Nevada Climbers Coalition started a wag bag, poop bag project in the Red Rock, and in other areas do it great too. I mean, Friends of Indian Creek have been doing it for a long time. Human Waste at Red Rock, like pretty much every climbing area now, is more climbers everywhere at pretty much every crag. Human waste is an issue, and for many years, the majority of the fundraising for the nonprofit, the Southern Nevada Climbers Coalition, involved basically like raising money so we could basically buy and fill these 5 wag bag dispensers that we built, and the BLM allowed us to place out in Red Rock in high traffic sensitive areas. And it's great that obviously that option exists, because, you know, there are bathrooms at some trailheads in Red Rock, but not all. And obviously when you're at some crags, you're not really close or easy to get back to the bathroom. But it got to the point where the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, which is the management agency for Red Rock, which is a national conservation area, actually realized that there was such a positive benefit to this, and saw that it was something worthy, that they actually stepped in and have basically shouldered the majority of the financial burden now.
Oh, that's awesome.
So good on the BLM
Yeah,
for that. However, like I mentioned, is that there are only 5 dispensers that we have in Red Rock, and a lot of people rolling into town, starting out their trip, do come through the shop to get guidebooks and, you know, other supplies and so forth. So we kind of act as the 6th sort of dispenser, I guess I'd say, for wag bags. We actually don't sell wag bags at the shop, but we have a donation box. So we have a supply of wag bags on hand, which actually helps people get them for basically at cost. It's just donating to cover the cost of the wag bags. They're paying half as much as they would if they would normally purchase them off the wall as a normal item. But obviously it's nothing that the store or the Southern Nevada Climbers Coalition or anything it's not an attempt to make money, obviously. It's just an idea that a lot of people right there to start their trip can grab one or a couple and keep them in their pack, have them on hand. They might not be going to an area in Red Rock. Red Rock is with one of the 5 dispensers. Red Rock is such a massive area, so many multi-pitch routes, you know, deep into canyons with long approaches and areas that are not near one of these dispensers that are out in the conservation area, that they at least have a shot of having one, you know, with them if they're venturing into those other areas. And it's something that, you know, maybe climbing shops in, you know, other areas that are kind of affiliated or tied in with kind of a prominent climbing sort of location, destination, would maybe consider doing. It doesn't really, you know, take much effort to, you know, if there is a local climbing organization or nonprofit to order some boxes of those wag bags and maybe offer them up at their kind of retail establishments by donation.
Yeah.
And just get these bags into more kind of climbers' hands and in their packs and stuff like that or whatever. You know, it's like, you know, we've been going through a lot of wag bags in a year before the BLM kind of helped us out and kicked in financially. And it was like, you know, I'm sure people were grabbing several at a time because they were heading to the valley afterwards to climb El Cap, or maybe hikers were out going, ooh, you know, I'm going on a backpacking trip. And, you know, and at first it seemed like, oh man, like, you know, people should be more on the honor system and not be grabbing maybe so many bags as once. But honestly, it's like, if they're grabbing them and they're going to be using them, and, you know, that's anything's a positive in terms of cutting back on waste.
Sure.
So I think you just got to look at it, you know, that way, and hopefully financially it, you know, it makes sense. So, it's actually been like a cool little thing to offer, and, you know, just kind of wish we'd been doing it a lot longer, actually.
Yeah, I've been in a couple situations where I've had to use them, and ever since I never go climbing without one.
Yeah.
Because it can be a bad situation if you don't have one in the pack.
Yeah, gosh. I mean, it's like, I always have one in my pack. I always keep a couple extra in my vehicle. You know, another little tidbit that we have in Red Rock and maybe in some other areas is like, you have all these like, you know, doggy bag dispensers at trailheads in a lot of places.
I've pooped in one of those.
And it's, what they're great for, I always tell everybody, I'm like, hey, if you're at one of these trailheads, just, even if you don't have a dog, as a climber, like, you know, take a few of those bags and keep them in your pack, because, you know, if you have wrappers for food, or you're taking, you know, tape off of your fingers, or, I mean, they make perfect little garbage bags to have with you. And, you know, it's a whole other discussion about tape waste and different sort of garbage sort of situations at crags these days, or whatever like that, because you didn't have a Ziploc bag or a plastic bag or something with you. So it's just an easy little thing to do, is like, if you're at a trailhead and there's a wag bag dispenser, it's like, hey, grab a couple of those, keep them in the pack. They'll probably come in handy for you, or, you know, somebody you're with. It's kind of just a little tip that I give people, you know. So it's actually, I guess, going back to crack gloves too, right? It's like, one of the benefits of crack gloves, right, is that it kind of cuts down on tape waste if you're not, you know, making, sort of tape crack gloves constantly. So I don't think we even mentioned that. But.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time, Travis. It's been fun.
Yeah. Thanks, Kevin.
All right. Well, that's the show. Want to thank Travis Graves for his time. If you're in Las Vegas, make sure you stop by Desert Rock Sports and say hello. Also want to thank our sponsor, Black Diamond Equipment. Make sure to check out their new C4 cams at blackdiamondequipment.com. Also, today's theme music was provided by Small Houses at smallhouses.band. All right, everyone. See you at the next base camp.